In case you haven't been on energy Twitter in the last month or so, there's a huge controversy going on in California.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today is either February 9th or February 10th, depending on who you're talking to. I'm Eric Planey.
I am Lucas Finko.
And I'm Brendan Banfield.
And today, across oceans and continents and around the globe, we are the Pirates of Clean Tech. Yar!
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 Oh, that's
All
a 10.
right.
That's a 10.
All right.
It's an Australian pirate, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You could honestly be the best guest yar we've had thus far. And you're not even drinking right now, which is pretty impressive.
Just coffee.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We do have a special friend all the way from Australia as our guest today. I'll let Lucas do an introduction in a second, but we just want to say hello to everybody. We want to give a shout out, as we always do. Here in the Northeast, we had some ice storms over the weekend, and even across the river for me in the Hudson Valley, people are going on third day and fourth day without power. So, hats off to the utility workers working in really tough conditions right now, taking care and mitigating those problems in the ice storm. So I want to give a shout out to all of them. But with that, I think it's timely to talk utilities and utility technology. I'm going to turn it over to Lucas to introduce our guest for today.
Yeah, so we have Brendan, who is the CEO, correct, of GridSight.ai.
Correct, yep.
Who's a pleasure to have on. So let's start with that. Can you tell us about GridSight and what is GridSight all about?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thanks for the intro, guys. So GridSight's, we're a software company based out of Wollongong, Australia, so a city just south of Sydney. So basically what we're trying to do is more or less, create this software infrastructure to allow utilities to kind of realize the fully decentralized and decarbonized grid. So basically, we realize, particularly here in Australia, there's huge numbers of residential distributed energy resources going on the grid, particularly solar PV. So here in Australia, we have the most solar or rooftop solar per capita in the whole world. So basically, 1 in every 4 houses here in Australia actually has rooftop solar.
Wow.
On their buildings. So even comparing, so in Australia, there's around, I think, 800 watts per capita, so per person worth of solar. And if you compare that with somewhere like the US, I think that's around 230 watts. Even somewhere like California, I think, has around 700 watts of installed capacity per person. So just huge amounts of solar. And basically, over the last few years, this is starting to cause kind of congestion on the grid, and we're starting to see some issues that's cropping up just because all of these renewable energy technologies are becoming unmanaged. So at GridSight, we kind of got to during my, research when I was doing my PhD, I was looking into a lot of this stuff and realized that, a lot of the technology and a lot of the, data sources on the grid already exist to be able to manage this sort of infrastructure, but it just wasn't being used. So we kind of got to the idea that, instead of just letting all of this renewables go unchecked and, the utilities and regulators start to bring in rules to try and limit some of this stuff, let's just use the data to actually try and improve how these technologies are being managed. So we can continue to see that, increase in renewable technologies that we're seeing in the home at the moment.
Cool. So you've been working with utilities, right?
Correct. Yeah. So our main clients at the moment are the electrical utilities. Yep.
So, okay, give me your frank assessment. How prepared are they for the clean energy transition?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it varies from utility to utility. So there are a lot of things happening, particularly here in Australia, like a lot of good steps towards kind of being able to manage this huge influx of, as I said, solar and EVs are becoming or going to become a real challenge as well. The biggest thing that I've found so far is just the pure speed at which these utilities operate. We all, I'm sure, are fully aware, really large organizations, they typically operate really slowly. But this transition at the moment is just, going at lightning speed. So I think the real challenge here related to preparedness is for them to be able to kind of, increase the speed at which they're kind of adopting these new technologies. Because I truly believe all of the tech that's required to assist in this transition already exists. As I said, there's already large amounts of data. We use a lot of data from smart meters in people's homes to do our analysis. There's hundreds of thousands of smart meters that are connected to the grid. And there's lots of these other tech companies doing these great things related to how we can manage these assets. It's just the pure speed at which these utilities that are adopting, these new techniques to managing the grid that I think is the real challenge.
Cool. I'm going to throw in audible here and ask a quick question, but
Yeah, for
obviously
sure.
Australia was in the news a lot about a year and a half ago for the wildfires that took place. And it seems philosophically over the last decade, Australia has definitely gone from a country that has a little more of a reputation for not adopting clean energy or, environmental standards to like rapidly deploying into it. Talk a little bit. I know Lucas just asked about the mentality of the utilities themselves, but how prepared were the utilities in actually like starting to adapt and starting to engage with, clean energy, like from both an infrastructure, logistics standpoint and a technology standpoint?
Yeah, excellent question. So the original kind of uptake, particularly for solar, happened around 10 years ago. So around, kind of 2010, 2012 area. So the government brought in these incentives, really large feed-in tariffs, where more or less they were paying people who put solar on their roof for whatever they're fed back into the grid. They were paying almost triple what people were actually paying to purchase electricity. So this led to this like really large influx in people installing solar, which has just been on the rise. And what I don't think they foresee was actually the problems that this was causing, particularly around voltage. So when there's really large amounts of solar on the grid, particularly in the residential sector, often people aren't at home to use it. They're all at work. So all this solar is just getting pushed back into the network. And what this can cause is more or less the network to become unstable. And we can see large voltage rises, which can even cause solar systems to disconnect from the grid due to safety. And I don't think they foresaw this coming. And it was kind of the perfect storm here in Australia, because not only do we have the rapid uptake in solar, but we also have a really large country that's obviously really spread out. So we have really long, distribution lines, which also adds to this problem. And we have a lot of sun. So it's almost like a threefold, coming together of these three different facets, which led to this problem. And I don't think the utilities were prepared for this, challenge that they're currently seeing. So I think in that sense, that was probably the biggest shock, and it is slowly, I guess, being addressed at the moment, but it is still a massive challenge that we're, utilities are facing every day.
This sounds a lot like some of the problems that different states in the U.S. are having, not necessarily the entire grid. I think California is kind of addressing some similar issues right now. Obviously, we know your domestic market very well, but if you had to compare and contrast how the Australian infrastructure works versus the U.S., and then how GridSight can kind of tailor, your technology and platform for potential more business in the United States.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the biggest difference we'll see between Australia and US is the sheer number of EVs that you guys have over there. I think EVs will probably be, much more of a significant problem, particularly in the kind of short to immediate term, than what we're seeing here in Australia. But for us, they're kind of two problems of the same coin. So with the large amounts of solar we have here in Australia, that's more of an over generation problem. We're seeing too much generation during the middle of the day. In contrast, when you'll be getting, the significant amounts of EVs that we're seeing over in the US, it's going to become an overloading problem where everyone's, plugging into charge in the evening sort of thing. But in terms of how we, I guess, manage this from an electrical engineering standpoint, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. So we just need to ensure that the infrastructure is in place to coordinate and manage these technologies to ensure that the grid remains safe and operational, as opposed to just leaving them unchecked, where we might start to run into some issues, particularly, saw a lot of things with all the cold weather that was happening in the US kind of recently and also last year as well. If we can manage these technologies in a smart way that benefits both the, the consumers and the grid at the same time, I think that's the best bet and kind of the commonality yet difference between the US and Australian markets.
Cool. Well, Brendan, I'm wondering, how did you get to where you are today? Could you talk a little bit about your career and how it evolved?
Yeah, for sure. So started out studying electrical engineering at the university here in Wollongong, actually. And really early on, as I was studying, I got to basically work with an electrical utility in the capital of Australia, Canberra. So I actually worked for those guys all throughout my bachelor's degree. So they're called Evo Energy. So during that time, I got, I guess, really a large amount of exposure to how these utilities operate and what the challenges were, particularly around, these unmanaged DERs or distributed energy resources that are on the grid. So that gave me some really good exposure, I guess, to the working worlds of the utility space. So following that, finished my degree, did some traveling, and then was offered a PhD from the university. So the PhD involved, I guess, building a kind of smart solar powered house here in Australia. And then once we built that house, we deconstruct it and take it to another country to compete against universities from all around the world. So it's called the Solar Decathlon. It actually started in the US. So we built our house here in Australia. So I was a team leader on that, looking after all the renewables and the smart energy system in the home, those sorts of things. So we built the house here in Australia. We actually built it twice here in Australia because we wanted to do a practice run. And then we took it all the way over to Dubai to compete against 15 other teams. So that was a really fun experience. We managed to come second at that competition, which is really exciting.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you. Then we brought the home back here to Australia and basically rebuilt it on a microgrid at the university's campus. And it more or less acted as the test bed for my research. So a lot of my research was looking at kind of exactly what we're talking about today. So this microgrid has huge amounts of solar, there's batteries, all these sorts of things. So I was more or less building a control system that could coordinate all these resources within the microgrid to ensure that we're getting the maximum amount of renewables onto the grid. We want to really produce as much renewables as we can, but we're also maintaining and ensuring that the grid remains stable and reliable. So it's kind of at this time, because I was getting data from all these different buildings within the microgrid, and I was realizing how much you can actually do with this data, like just pure kind of metering data. And it got my wheels turning that, there's so much I'm able to do with just this small amount of data in this microgrid. Imagine how much more you could do if you actually dove into all the data that these utilities, have access to. But a lot of them, they either, don't have the time or don't have the, I guess, infrastructure internally or the people to start, using this data to its full potential.
Oh, so going further on that, I'm wondering if you could provide some advice. We have a lot of young listeners that want to get into clean tech or trying to, work on their careers, develop their careers. Could you give some advice for others on how to get into clean tech? What would you say to them?
Yeah, there's a few ones there. So I guess, one of the easiest ones is obviously just go to university and study something in this space. So I studied electrical engineering, which is obviously a good one with all the renewables. But I think another good one to add on that too is to study software engineering at the same time. Yeah. Like more and more as I'm progressing, basically every field of engineering, whether you're a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, whatever it may be, everyone ends up diverging and doing some kind of software engineering at the same time. So I unfortunately had to kind of, self-teach myself everything. And if I could have gone back, I would have said, do that software engineering too. But yeah, more and more, I think software is going to play an increasingly important part in this transition, particularly with, as I said, all this data that we're seeing on the grid. But another one I think is just pick something you're really passionate about. So clean tech's a massive, massive space, large scale renewables, EVs, all this sort of thing. And for me, yeah, the one I was passionate about is all these, renewable energy technologies in people's homes and ensuring people can live, I guess, a clean lifestyle and ensure that they can have these technologies and they aren't hindered by any regulation or those sorts of things. So for me, being able to, I guess, focus on that space and, tailor my PhD towards it, and then subsequently found GridSight to kind of assist with that problem. I think that's a real, I guess, benefit, and it'll really assist with the longevity of a career if you're doing something you're really, really passionate about.
Brendan, I have to ask this because when you were telling me about the business model of GridSight, it's almost a little bit of a thankless job, because I feel that your definition of success is creating this great amount of stability in the grid to allow for more renewables. And when there's stability, people don't necessarily recognize that there's stability because they kind of get for granted to get used to it. So yeah. How do you judge success? And more importantly, how do your customers know that you are achieving success? Like, what are the, do they have an understanding of the metrics that you're going to present to them after, implementing your system into the grid?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And you're exactly right. So basically the biggest way these problems are being managed at the moment here in Australia is that whenever there's a large amount of solar in the area, often someone will open up their app and notice that, hey, my solar hasn't been operating correctly for the last month. What's going on? They'll ring up the utility, say, hey, this is going on. The utility will then send a truck out to put some monitoring equipment on the network. They'll wait a week. They'll take it off. They'll bring it back. Someone will open it up in Excel. They'll analyze it. If there's then a problem, they might send a truck back out to maybe adjust the transformer. And this takes weeks and weeks and weeks. So that's kind of the driving force behind a lot of this, managing of small scale renewables in Australia is purely through customer complaints. So for us, what we want to do is basically use all this data to surface the areas where these challenges either are occurring or are going to occur really quickly, so that more or less these utilities can go out and start mitigating these problems in a much more proactive manner as opposed to reactive. So for us, a key metric that we've kind of discussed with our utilities is that, yeah, you can take a much more targeted approach to managing these customers and make sure those customers are happy. So we should be able to see those customer complaints, which has been on an exponential rise for the last few years, start to dip. So yeah, that's one kind of key metric that we should see hopefully in the future. And moreover, they shouldn't have to, with all that data there, they shouldn't have to, send monitoring equipment out in the network and all that added cost of, sending field workers out. We can do all that stuff in-house purely with the data that's available to us.
That's really cool. I don't know, Lucas, if you were going to pull up the website for GridSight.
Yeah.
If you have it. So while he's doing that, I have to ask a question, Brendan. Given that the Olympics are taking place right now, you mentioned that you came in second place in Dubai. Please tell us that it was the Americans that came in first place and got the gold medal.
I hate to admit it, but it was, yeah. It was Virginia Tech.
Oh, Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
West Virginia.
Well, we won't start screaming USA like Americans tend to do. But well, honestly, that's a win-win for you guys and for everyone to have that type of solar technology and to get a silver medal on that. But
yeah, thank you.
So Brendan, what's your website?
Yeah, so my website's up on the page. It's www.GridSight.ai. So yeah, there's contact details there. If you have any questions, feel free to send us an email, and we'll be happy to have a chat.
So what's your expansion plans internationally? Obviously, you're growing in Australia, but are we going to see GridSight coming in the U.S. shores anytime soon?
Yeah, we really hope so. So we're already working with some utilities in New Zealand as well, which is really exciting. But yeah, we've definitely got plans to head over to the US. Obviously, working in a place like Hawaii where they've got really large amounts of solar, California as well, we think make perfect sense. So hopefully within the next year or two, you see, GridSight making its way over your side, and we can work on some really exciting projects over there as well.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's really funny because California actually introduced a residential solar mandate on new residential buildings. And I actually wrote an article critical of that for precisely the reasons you brought up, right? So
yeah, funnily enough, that case study you're looking at right there, we were looking at some suburbs that had mandated 100% solar. So yeah, excellent for the consumers, but it was causing all kind of havoc on the grid. So that was a really interesting one to dive into that obviously would be really applicable for somewhere like California.
But then you have to have GridSight, right?
Absolutely. You've got to have GridSight to help.
That's right.
But I almost wondered, you mentioned the consumers in Australia that were putting solar on their roof, but in a way, sometimes they must have felt like they were getting hosed, because if they're promised that they're going to put so much electricity back into the grid and get a benefit from it, but then they had to shut it down because there was too much entering at the same time, then they're not getting probably the returns that they were told they were going to get, because the sales guy is selling one unit to that house and not thinking about the whole geography of that neighborhood or that grid, right?
That's exactly correct. Yeah. And that's one of the biggest issues. And the worst thing is some consumers get hit a lot harder than others. So it's more or less usually the consumers who are all the way up the edge of the network, they get hit the hardest. So, your neighbor that's up the road right next to the transformer, their solar system might operate perfectly, no worries, but you're all the way down the other end of the street at the edge of the network. And that's where all the problems are starting to crop up. So it's this real kind of, discrepancy between fairness, really. And it's a big problem that's actually starting to be looked at. How can we ensure fairness between all these different consumers with these similar technologies that one customer isn't getting, loss on their investment compared to the others. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. No, it's fascinating. These are the technologies that we really need to get to where our goals are as, a country like Australia, a country like the United States, but globally. It's kind of the bridge technologies, if you will, that's taking an idea and putting it with today's infrastructure and making sure it's done smoothly. So hats off to you for coming up with this really great idea.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
As we wrap up, I first got another thing I have to tell you, Brendan. I'm not sure if I'm going to win points with you or not, but I actually have a car that was made in Australia.
Really?
Yeah, I drive the American version of the Holden Commodore.
Oh, wow.
But it's a complete gas hog. I'll be the first to admit
Yeah.
it's my
Yeah.
it's my summer weekend driver only, but I absolutely love that car. So somewhere around here I have a Holden racing jacket. I was gonna put it on.
Oh, that is excellent. I don't think I've ever met someone from the US who drives, as we would call it here, a commie.
Yeah. I've got the Pontiac version called G8, and then Chevy made a version, but that car is just, it's the only relationship my wife is jealous of with my. It's a fantastic automobile, and it's indicative of Australian engineering. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we have the website. It was GridSight.ai, I believe.
Yep, correct.
Brendan, this was fantastic. We really appreciate having you on. We know you had to get up a little bit early. You volunteered not to do a beer of the week with us because it's 8 a.m. You got to go to work. But appreciate having you on, and we hope to have you on in the future, maybe when you're launching your US product.
Definitely. No worries. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
And we're back. Lucas, great find with Brendan. I thought he was a fantastic guest, and what a great technology.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, everybody's always talking about, oh, data this, data the new oil, data. And it's like, well, what are you going to do with it? And so it's really cool to see him take all this data and actually get value out of it. So it's really cool to see.
I love the fact that he may be entering America through, the island economies and their kind of specific grid needs, given that's a closed system like Hawaii. And I think he mentioned, California, but maybe even, he didn't mention Puerto Rico, but they could probably use it as well.
Yeah. And Vermont has a lot of solar too, I think. So yeah, there's lots of options. New York, Massachusetts, right? So awesome. Yeah, that'd be cool to see some international. It all ties together. I just love this. Okay, we'll talk more about it in my articles.
I love you saying it all ties together because I'm in such an Olympic mood with the Olympics going on, international. I'm wearing my Eastern European, mafia tracksuit right now. Feeling really good. By the way, I'm Eastern European heritage, so I'm allowed to say that. So my articles, and I think I'm going first this time.
Uh-huh.
My articles have an Olympic international theme. I've been trying to find stuff from around the world. We're going to start off with the good old USA, which, by the way, Virginia Tech, hats off. You beat the Australians in this solar home competition. Love it. So going back home here, the Youngstown Business Journal, great publication from February 4th. My good friend Dan O'Brien writes a story. Scroll down a little bit if you can.
There we go.
EPA takes issue with USPS plan for next generation vehicles. This is just absolutely horrible. So the U.S. Postal Service under the last administration, maybe at the very beginning of the Biden administration, I can't remember timing, they finally came out with their plan for replacing their aged fleet of delivery vehicles. And believe it or not, they came out with the company's called Oshkosh. They're the ones, the main contractor, and 90% of the new vehicles are going to be internal combustion engine, and only 10% are going to be battery electric vehicles. And so this article says the US EPA calls this seriously deficient and said that this contract needs to be opened up and be reevaluated, because we're talking here about, these are going to be vehicles that are going to be on the road 20, 30 years, like the existing fleet. The EPA pointed out that competitors such as FedEx plan to have a fully committed electrified fleet by 2040. UPS plans on doing the same thing by 2050. So it's time for this contract to be reopened. And I think there's a solution here. Shameless plug, but also if you go on change.org, and we're going to post this in our links, yours truly has come up with a petition for the US Post Office to go all hybrid or electric in its new fleet instead of this 90-10 BS. This absolutely has to change. I don't think that the fleet has to be 100% battery electric. We know that there's, battery material supply chain issues. We know there has to be some flexibility. So for me, I think the solution is plug-in electric hybrids for most of their fleet. The range of the battery should be just slightly above what the average range of an average delivery vehicle makes on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a gasoline backup, just like a Chevy Volt, to kick in for the remaining part. And sometimes,
Yeah.
trucks are a little heavier on certain days. They may need a little bit more power. They may drain the battery faster. So I'm okay with plug-in electric hybrids because it's a proven technology. It's still going to use the battery. It's going to reduce gasoline usage, and then have maybe 25% of the fleet be full-on BEV. But we cannot have 90% conventional gasoline engines. So please, here's the link. Is going to be on all our podcast websites. It's going to be on YouTube. Please sign this petition, because you know what? The Pirates of Clean Tech followers can make a stand, and we're going to make a stand, and we're going to stand up for what's right and what's green.
Yeah, so you have 16 signatures already. Mine is in here. Let's get to 100. That would be awesome. Let's get to 10,000. I'd like to see this at 10,000.
I think we need to get this to 10,000. So let's get to 1,000 by the end of the week. And then let's get it, from there, it hopefully snowballs. Because not only do we want you to sign it, we want you to share it on your social media, because we can actually take a stand and we can do something that's right. And all of us can have a participation in this. We're going to make sure the Postmaster General gets this. So,
yeah. So you can see on my LinkedIn too, I was having a discussion with somebody about electric school buses, which also are perfect application for EV. So I'd like to see that too.
Yeah, and I would, same thing, with the school buses, I would be okay with maybe some sort of hybrid solution, right? At least for a part of the fleet. Propane, everyone was talking about propane school buses 2 years ago. Why couldn't you do a propane electric hybrid?
Yeah. Well, then you get the range and the EV for the everyday use. Yeah. It's just great.
And if it kicks on to the gasoline burning engine, it is slightly cleaner than regular gasoline. So.
Oh, propane. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so now this one is the esprit de corps of international cooperation, which is very similar to why the Olympic Games exist, right? I love this article. This is out of the Jewish News Syndicate. I don't know if we have a date on it, but New York launches contest for Israeli startups to tackle clean energy challenge. And it's going to focus on next generation of electric vehicle charging, artificial intelligence, and energy storage. I don't know. Oh, this is from February 9th. I don't know if many of you know about Israel and about what incredible technology comes out of there. And effectively, the story comes down to this. During the end of the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall came down and there were so many Russian Jews who decided that to move back to the homeland to Israel, the Israeli government was so smart. They recognized it had all this talent, all these PhDs come into their country, and they needed to take advantage of this intellectual firepower. So they created this incredible system of incubators throughout the whole entire country. And since then, the burgeoning technology that comes out of Israel is just incredible. So it's really cool that New York has signed this agreement, with Israel, with Israeli technology companies to kind of have this incubation. I'm happy to say that in the Middle East, Israel is now selling their products to neighbors that they probably would not have sold to 10 years ago. So I think, sometimes technology and commerce helps break down barriers and borders. And I'm really happy that New York State is kind of taking advantage of a great relationship that already exists by bringing more clean energy technology. We just heard about what GridSmart can do, how it can be a bridge from new technology, renewable energy to existing infrastructure. This agreement, I think, will do something very similar.
Yeah, this is great. And I have an article also on international cooperation for clean energy that's right in our backyard here in New York. So this is great to see. Any kind of incentives or encouragement for innovation is always welcome, and anything that helps the clean energy transition, I'm for.
Cool, very cool. So this is, great international story again. On to our next international story.
Oh boy.
Yes. The Financial Express through MSN.com. India's renewable energy sector can employ 1 million people by 2030. This was a study recently conducted. I actually sought this out because, when in our searching for international news on clean energy, the reality is we don't hear that much coming from India. So I decided to take it upon myself last week to do a little bit of searching. I did some Google searching, and this was the article du jour that popped up about a week ago. So, 1 million jobs in India sounds like a lot, but as a percentage of the population, it may not be. But what I do like about this is there is definitely a focus on next generation grid infrastructure, green energy, both solar, hydro, everything. There seems to be a coordinated plan led by the government. I think many people know that Indian life, if you will, is based on a very decentralized government, where like the states and territories, all provinces, all kind of have their own different mandates, and maybe there's not as much power to central government as there should be. I think that's changing with regards to having a green energy plan. So, great stat here in 21 fiscal 21, majority of new workers employed were, I think they added for about 1.4 gigawatts of new capacity. So far, 78,000 people have been trained under certain training programs between 2015 and 2017 to improve the availability of skilled workers for clean energy projects.
Right.
Those are the fundamentals. Those are the things that don't make the headlines, but they need to get done. You need to have a skilled workforce in order for the grid to be transitioning over to green. So I just think that this is a really good story because it really shows the seriousness of Indian government at the federal level and also the decentralized levels to put the grid to work and to turn it green.
Yep. So, these are all the same things we've been harping on, right, for years now. So it's great to see. Yeah, I just wish they would have put a zero behind this one. Like 10 million would have been more appropriate, right? So I don't know.
Well,
We'll work on it.
That's actually a really good point because again, India is one of the major carbon emitters in the globe.
Yeah.
We're starting to see studies that are coming out. Maybe we'll talk about it more next episode. But I think BBC had a story a couple of days ago that the major corporates in throughout the world are not doing enough to get us to our climate goals. And so that's on the corporate side. On the country side, we're also not doing enough. And so India needs to step up. Maybe a GridSight needs to make its way to India in order to help the existing grid. But these are the things that have to get done and have to be essential. So happy to see this progress on India, but I think more needs to come. You're absolutely right, Lucas.
Yeah. The amount they're growing, right? They need clean energy fast now. So
yep. And then I think this is my last story. This is on Yahoo Finance, February 3rd. The government of Canada invests in clean technology to support sustainable farming practices. We just on Pirates of Clean Tech, we don't talk too much about sustainable ag, but I also think that this is one of those hidden gems that we need to be addressing. I think there's more emissions from, farms and farming tech. There's more sometimes release inadvertently of, chemicals from fertilizers into water streams, et cetera. So, the farming industry is so important for us to have sustainable methodologies being put in place, especially as population increases. We need to be smarter about how we're making food. So I was just really happy to see that the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food announced the first wave of 60 projects under the Agricultural Clean Technology Program. It's only $18 million, but farms and ag businesses will have access to the technology for incubation and putting into their own system. So another good story. This talks about maybe a little bit more detail about how it's broken up province to province. Again, really good. $18 million is probably a drop in the bucket. So we'd like to see more out of that. But I think we just wanted to acknowledge our friends to the north for, talking more and more about fostering clean food because, again, it's another thing that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, this is great. I know Canada has been engaged in a lot of clean energy projects. It's great to see them working at the intersection here between agricultural and clean energy. I would really like to see this money have a huge impact. That would be awesome. So it's great to see.
And what? I'd like to see a little more collaboration between the U.S. and Canada as well. Especially in ag tech, because I think a lot of geographic territories between the northern U.S. and southern Canadian border, there's probably a lot of similarities. And so spreading wealth and spreading technology just makes sense.
Yeah, they're focused on green energy, energy efficiency, precision agriculture, and the bioeconomy. That'd be good to see. I was just saying biofuels are not getting enough attention, in my opinion.
We need to have a guest at some point talking about urban ag as well. I think urban ag is really fantastic. And I think so many cities in the United States, especially like food desert cities, are benefiting from urban ag. So let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
That's it.
All done.
I'm handing the torch over.
Okay.
I'm hopefully New Jersey.
Yeah. I'm hopefully going to bring some controversial subjects here, so this should be juicy. So I'll skip over here. In case you haven't been on energy Twitter in the last month or so, there's a huge controversy going on in California. They're trying to basically tank net energy metering tariff which is just like what Brendan was talking about. It's a very rich feed-in tariff where the utility pays you basically 3 times what they should for the electricity that's produced by solar panels on your roof. And so they have a order to basically, cut that down to 1 instead of 3. And so you'd be getting pennies. And now people who installed these expensive solar panel systems on their roofs are not going to be able to recoup costs, and they are up in arms. A lot of industry participants are up in arms. It was in a public review period. That review period has been deferred until February 10th. So if you are not happy about this, I invite you to let the CPUC know all about it. This plays right in with what we were talking about with Brendan. Like, if you put solar panels way out on the grid on the edge, and utilities don't have a way to manage them, and they go cause problems on the grid, but for some reason we're paying them a huge premium for the energy, this can't continue. So there has to be some give here. It doesn't necessarily make sense to drop these people and cut their payments by a third overnight, but something has to be done. So this has been a long going argument. The fight is still going on. So I wanted to bring this up.
For me, it's what a conundrum. And I think this is a situation where California early on was probably so hot and heavy to have distributed rooftop solar that they put in this outlandish, pricing that the utilities are forced to take at 3 times the rate. And now, if you think about it, these systems that are going on rooftops should be cheaper than what happened 5 years ago, because the cost of the solar is cheaper, the panels themselves.
Well, right.
So there should be some rationing, if you will, kind of like rationalization of the pricing, meaning California, it should be cheaper to put that rooftop system up versus 5 years ago. And as a result of that, your break even shouldn't move that much, even if you're only getting one time the retail amount that you were putting into the grid versus others that put in it 3 times. So California, I think they shot themselves in the foot by having this exorbitant pricing. They hurt the utilities. They benefited consumers short term. So maybe there's some sort of tax break additionally that can be given to people who are eating a higher price and having a higher, break even cost. But, given home price appreciation, everything in California, I don't think people are going to lose out that much. So there should be a compromise in there to make this better.
Yeah, and so there's some parts in here that make it a little easier to accept. So they're going to guarantee a 10-year payback period if you had energy storage. They're going to give you a 15-year grandfathering, right? So for example, if you had your system for 10 years already, you would still get the old rate for 5 years. Hopefully that's enough time to pay back the cost of your solar panels, but there is an additional grid participation charge. So, if you have to go install smart switches and, hire GridSight to help you manage all this power flow all over the place, that costs money. So that's where this charge is coming from. It's just the reality of the situation. I don't like it either, but I think you make a good point. We should have been incrementally chipping at this for a decade now, instead of avoiding the problem and continuing with this, amazing rate that we gave to these people. So
yeah, by the way, we should mention Lucas nor I are investors in GridSight because we keep pushing the product as a solution. We just think it's a great technology, and it's that type of technology that needs to get implemented to smooth out these issues. So
yeah, okay.
No shameless plugging on our part.
Okay, so I'm going to get even more controversial now, because this has been going on for about a month now. So we're bringing it up. But I saw a report come out, a 20-year draft transmission outlook for California. This is from the California ISO. They operate the wholesale grid there, January 31st, 22. It's a draft, okay, by the way. And, I started reading this, and they have some huge transmission goals. I'll bring you down in here. Huge plans for large transmission projects that need to be installed. And so here's the graph, and I'll try and zoom in on this so we can see this. And you'll notice that a lot of their planning has to do with offshore wind. They don't have a lot of onshore wind planned. And a lot of solar, utility scale solar. So 30 gigawatts of solar, 5 gigawatts of solar. Is 5 gigawatts of geothermal, 10 gigawatts of solar. So what I'm seeing here is utility scale solar and wind installations and utility scale transmission lines being proposed at the same time they're reducing incentives on rooftop solar. And so I'm just putting it out there. It looks like it looks like utility planners are getting a big headache from residential solar and managing all those issues. And they're saying, forget it. We're just going to do utility scale and keep the grid as it is. And power is going to flow from utility scale solar and wind down through the grid, just like it does now. And we're going to let the utilities manage all this. That's what this looks like to me, right? I don't know. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, while you were saying that, I'm contemplating whether I agree with that philosophy or not, because I think there is a lot of efficiency from utility scale power generation.
Right.
And if you put it with the right grid, and again, I'm not an investor in utilities or anything like that, I'm truly thinking about what is most efficient, because it goes back to the bigger picture premise. For us to get to where we need to on Paris Climate Accord, we need to spend a lot of money. And so we have to be smart with every dollar. And for me, utility scale power generation that's green makes more sense that way when I'm looking at the big picture overall. So I think I'm okay with this. Maybe they need to be more transparent to consumers about that. God forbid we have transparency in our government and in our quasi-government entities, but I think they should, let's pick a winner maybe and just run with it.
Yeah. Well, and again, utility scale benefits utilities, it benefits ISO, it benefits the existing players, right? The ISO is supposed to be independent. So, I mean, I agree with what you said. I mean, these utility scale investments have a better, economies of scale, and you get all the management of the ISOs and the planners and the utility planners. You get all that with it too, right? So you have professionals managing all this. So there are some benefits to utility scale clean energy, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
The other thing is, rooftop solar makes sense for me somewhere like Cyprus, where there's not a lot of land for big solar farms, big wind farms, even though Cyprus is an island, you could have a lot of offshore wind. California has a lot of room. Even though they're large, there is some population density in urban centers. They've got a lot of room for these large projects. And I think this is the way to go, quite honestly.
Yeah. So anyhow, I don't know. When I saw these two things, I just made a connection between them, and I'm like, oh, look at that. It registered in somebody's head that we should not be doing rooftop solar. We should be doing utility scale solar. So we'll see how this battle plays out. It's going to happen in policy meetings, right? So yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
There is one X factor though, and that is the resiliency factor, because California right now, their grid keeps going down with wildfires, occasional mudslide. So people want to have rooftop with a battery for them, not to be green per se, but to make sure they have power at their house. Right. So if this transmission line program, it really has to improve the resiliency of the entire grid in order for consumers to have appropriate buy-in, in my opinion.
Yeah, utilities don't have the best PR in California right now, right?
They do not.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Another interesting article. This is from the Gotham Gazette, written by our friend Carolyn Cassane, who's been a guest on here. Yay! February 3rd. Check this out. Super cool. To keep the lights on in New York City, look to renewable energy. We love to see Carolyn talk about clean energy. So in case you don't know, there were two major transmission lines that were approved in New York State recently for installation. One is the old Champlain Hudson Power Express, a 339-mile buried transmission line that will go from Quebec under Lake Champlain and then cut over to the Hudson River and then go down the Hudson River. So there's a little less NIMBYism because it'll be hidden underwater. And so it's been approved and it's going in. I guess there's a public comment period that's coming up pretty shortly. Oh, it was yesterday, February 7th, or 2 days ago. So shoot, we should have got this on earlier. But anyhow, we also had we also had kind of a similar debate on LinkedIn about this, that some people have actually in New York have been opposed to this line with the argument that we should be incentivizing clean energy development in New York State and not taking it in from another country, taking it in from Quebec, et cetera, et cetera. And her part of my argument kind of here, which I really like, is that it has geopolitical value, right? That if we are tied economically with Canada, then we're less likely to pick a fight with Canada, right, or go to war with Canada or something like that, because our futures and our economies are intertwined. And so that's kind of the geopolitical argument here. So really interesting to see this, and it really got me thinking about the implications, the broader implications of a clean energy transition, and how multi-tentacled things are going to get. And I think we're going to see more of this come up as the clean energy transition moves. This is maybe some of the messiness I was talking about with the middle transition period. So yeah, thanks, Carolyn, for bringing this up. It's a really cool article. Check it out.
So I have to laugh because God's truth, my brother yesterday sent me a YouTube clip of one of our favorite scenes of the TV show Family Ties when we were kids. Alex B. Keaton and his two buddies had these three girls convinced they were all Air Force lieutenants and they were invading Canada the next day. And then Alex's mother shows up at the bar and everything goes kaput. I kid you not. We're going to put the link with our episodes. I think Carolyn's point is dead on about the geopolitical positive impacts from this. But I also think there's one other point to consider. When we're talking about Quebec and hydropower, we're not talking about spending a ton of capital building out something. This is an abundance of hydropower that already exists.
Right.
Quebec doesn't know what to do with all the power they're generating. In fact, they were trying to bring crypto miners in at ridiculously cheap prices because they had to use electricity for something. And so, like, for me, again, it goes back to resource allocation. If they've got the hydropower and they don't have the population density and need for it, why wouldn't we run a line across the border and bring it to New York City? So I think it's absolutely a great move. It's not like New York is not focusing on its own offshore wind or solar farms or other initiatives. They're all in for that.
Right.
I live right on the Hudson River, and I can't wait to start seeing wind turbine blades come down on barges that are being put together in Albany.
Correct. So
this is great. I think it's a great story, and thank you, Carolyn, fellow pirate, for bringing it to light.
Yeah, she does talk about this too. That it's, in case people didn't know, Quebec does have a ton of hydropower. It's zero carbon energy, and it can be used to balance with the solar we have and with the wind we have. When the wind doesn't blow and when the sun doesn't shine, we'll be able to use Canadian hydropower. So yeah.
And I would add one other thing. If you're not following Carolyn Cassane on LinkedIn, please do so. She's had some great articles recently about some of the turmoil in Central Asia and geopolitical impacts associated with from that turmoil, but also impacting on the energy side, but also just the humanitarian and political side.
Yep, which she is an expert in, and she's very active on LinkedIn. So yeah, check her out, follow her, connect with her if you know her.
Wow, we covered a lot of ground here in a very quick time. Great find with picking Brendan as our guest, Lucas. So just another great one. We're having some great guests on this season, and we hope to keep that up.
Yeah, we are going to keep it up, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are so excited about our guests. We forgot to do our disclaimer at the beginning of the show, but obviously, views and opinions expressed by Lucas and I are those of ourselves, not any organizations we are affiliated with. And any public company we talk about, we are not making a recommendation one way or the other about any underlying public securities that you may be able to purchase or sell. So please do your homework. Please consult with a registered investment professional, and don't listen to us for any advice that way.
And you can also find us on YouTube if you want to follow along the articles with us. You search for Pirates of Clean Tech and you click subscribe, and then there's a little alarm bell, and that'll notify you when our latest video is out, which you want to get right away. You can also find us on your favorite podcast venue. Search for Pirates of Clean Tech and you'll find us. I think a lot of people watch us on Apple Podcasts. We're on about a dozen podcast sites. So you can find us where you like to listen to podcasts.
I tell you what, the one thing I've noticed is that there's so much going on in clean tech and clean energy policy that we're not covering everything.
Yeah.
So we hope that everyone here is also using us as a springboard for your own research and your own following. We try to cover as much as we can. We try to give you a flavor for what's going on, but there is a lot out there. So if any of you have suggestions on areas we're not covering and you'd like us to, find us on our social media and reach out to us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We love when our listeners get hold of us. We take their advice. Hopefully one of you will tell me to get a haircut in the next week or two, and I'm going to do that. So with that, thank you, everybody. I'm Eric Planey.
I am Lucas Finko.
And together we are the Pirates of Clean Tech.